What's up, Swole Soldiers? This is episode 25 of the Strength House podcast. We're going to recap a bunch of beginner powerlifter questions that we received at our Optimizing the Big Three seminar this past weekend, including how to categorize your lifts from competition lifts to supplementary lifts to assistance lifts, how to categorize between mechanical stress and metabolic stress to maximize hypertrophy and recovery, and we're going to talk about why an ounce of prevention is worth a pound of cure in staying in the powerlifting realm for the long term.
The Strength House Podcast, featuring Greg Robbins and Tony Bonvecchio.
What's up, everyone? Welcome to episode 25 of the Strength House Podcast. We are live from the OG Strength House Podcast studio, and we got a good episode for you tonight. We just came off an awesome Optimizing the Big Three seminar at Cressy Sports Performance this past Sunday, just a few days ago, and that was a high energy environment.
Yep, it was awesome. The best turnout we've had so far in terms of just actual numbers and the energy, all the PRs that were hit. Definitely some of the heaviest lifts we've seen at a Big Three seminar so far.
Yeah, yep, it was a great seminar. We had a sold out house. Everyone was super attentive, brought the energy during the hands-on portion, and so we thought that we would build off that a little bit tonight, sample a few great beers, and just talk about some of the common threads that we saw in the seminar. And I mean, that was, I'd have to go back and look, but that's probably like the 6th, 7th time that we've done the seminar, I think, at this point.
Yep, and we always run into a situation we were talking earlier about how, like, time just kind of gets away from you. You know, it's a long day, but it goes quick. We tend to have a lot of questions that we expand upon a little bit in the lecture portion, but everyone's always itching to just, like, get to the hands-on, because that's really, I think, the where you get all the big takeaways from that seminar. So I'm excited to talk about some of those questions that we got and expand on them a little bit. So if anybody here is listening tonight, or listening on iTunes in the future, who was at the seminar, good chance that you're going to get one of your questions answered in a little bit more depth than what we were able to go into day of the seminar.
Absolutely. Yeah, so we will get right into just about 12 topics that we have for this episode. 12 really solid topics. But before we do, we have some really great beers. Well, actually, I don't know if they're really great because we haven't exactly tried them yet. But
we hope they're great.
They're supposed to be really great. Some submitted beers from our friends in Virginia, both Jordan Frank and his buddy there too as well, who was actually the one that actually went out and got these beers for us. They are from Triple Crossing Brewing in Richmond, Virginia. So I think we've had some beers from the Vale on here before from Richmond, Virginia. But tonight we will try what they say are equally as good.
All right.
In Triple Crossing Brewing.
This is really, like we said before when we've had listeners submitted beers, like, we're living the dream right now.
Yes.
People sending us beers, and we did that whole episode on like how we got into beer trading and the ins and outs of how you ship beer and stuff. That was a pretty entertaining episode. Go back and listen if you haven't heard it yet. But I just shipped some beer out to one of our longtime Strength House lifters, Leslie, who lives out in Kansas City, Missouri, and we were texting back and forth a little bit, and I said, good beer karma is the best beer karma.
Yep.
So Jordan and your buddy, I think you're going to bring yourself some good beer karma by sending us these.
Yes. What's up, Addison? Checking in, says, what's up, guys? Also, I forgot to mention, but shame on me, we have some awesome glassware tonight from the people at Barbells and Brewskis. They sent us a very nice care package. Wearing the shirt here as well, coasters, stickers, all that good stuff.
I'd have worn the shirt, but us matching might have been a little bit too much.
You got the Shadows Fall t-shirt on.
Yep, got to represent Massachusetts metal. Shadows Fall. Went to see them in Worcester, Massachusetts, my senior year of high school at the Palladium. No coincidence that we are opening a gym in the city that made me fall in love with live heavy metal music.
Worcester has a a really great metal scene and a very like growing craft beer scene as well.
Yep, Greater Good is moving to Worcester.
Greater Good.
We haven't had Greater Good on the podcast yet, but we've had many a Greater Good as a pre-podcast beer, and they make some good stuff.
Yes, they did.
All right, so what are we drinking right now?
So we are drinking Ivory Tower Double IPA, part of the Lockout series. I don't really know what that means, but it sounds cool.
It's a lifting reference.
Yeah. Drink these beers, improve your lockout.
There you go.
Let's see what we got here.
All right. I mean, it's pouring a very hazy, kind of orangey, darkish. It looks like something we drink.
Yep. It's definitely in that hazy IPA vein.
And something I love about this style of glass, I don't know what the style is called, but it fits pretty much an entire 16-ounce can, which is awesome.
Yep, it's actually called a can glass.
A can glass, there you go. Makes all the sense in the world.
Let's check it out.
This smells like something familiar. It smells like Mosaic. I can recognize that by now.
I like that. That's solid.
That's good.
That is good.
You know what this tastes like at first sip? Tastes a lot like West Side to me, the double IPA from Long Live that we had on a couple weeks ago. But the finish is like quick.
Yeah.
It like tapers off very quickly into kind of more of like a grapefruity, like bitter citrus note.
Yeah, it's not aggressive by any means. It's a solid beer.
This is good. And you know, before we went on air, I was pissing and moaning about how I'm so over Mosaic as a hop. And Mosaic is one of the many hops that gets featured in a lot of the style of IPAs that we drink. But it's a good representation here because it finishes more on the bitter side. And I always say, like, I get sick of like the apple juice flavor that you get a lot of times with the Mosaic hops. But
it's a crushable beer.
It's good, yeah.
Yeah. I like it a lot.
Well done, fellas. Thanks for sending these.
Yep, very solid. Very solid. If you're in the Richmond, Virginia area, check out Crossing Brewing. I'm not sure why their logo is an X, because I would call that a four-way crossing, but, you know, to each their own. All right. So, we covered the beer.
We did.
We covered.
We have to talk about
training. Seminar. Shout out to Barbells and Brewskis again. If you'd like to get any of their merch, I'm sure it is for sale on Barbells in with an N, not N. Barbells Brewskis.com.
They also have an awesome Facebook group, really cool community, a lot of funny, entertaining stuff posted on there.
People do some fucked up shit in that group. Sorry, excuse my language, but
like some,
it has escalated, at least in the time that we were at it.
Like chugging videos and stuff like that?
There's been some, recently, chugging videos, people doing, half-nude chugging videos.
Half-nude? That's not that bad.
There's some guy in there who was doing, stuff I haven't seen since I was in college, where you, take a hit out of a bong, chug a beer, and then blow it out. Hey, it is entertaining. I highly recommend you join the Barbells and Brewskis group for some good old-fashioned entertainment. But, yeah, a lot of people that are into fitness and also into having a good time and trying some pretty good beer. And it led me to actually find out about some of the beer up in the Pacific Northwest, where I think the owner Jenny's from and things like that, and I found some good beer up there that I traded for. So, quality group. But let's get into some of these questions, because we got 12 topics to go over tonight. First one was yours. So, Tony, tell me about people, or lifters more specifically, who are not open to coaching advice.
And, the reason I thought of this topic was this was maybe the first of all the big 3 seminars that we've done where there hasn't been, or I didn't have a single interaction with a lifter where they gave me pushback on my advice, which is really, really refreshing. I mean, you pay a bunch of money to go to the seminar. You got people who are giving the seminar who people dub us as experts for whatever reason, I like to think we know a thing or two about lifting, but if you're gonna give up your Sunday, you're gonna spend a bunch of money to learn about lifting, you want to be open-minded about what the presenters are saying. And a lot of times in the past, I've run into at least a couple lifters who have been like, well, like, this is the way I've always done it. And I hate that term. Those are really dangerous words to live by. But at this seminar, it's super refreshing because not a single person gave me pushback anytime I gave them advice on their technique or said, like, maybe let's try this, let's try that instead. And I just think that is so important, no matter what level lifter you are, because the great thing about the sport of powerlifting is there's always room to get better. Like, we've yet to, records keep getting broken. World records fall, almost every year at this point, especially in the raw powerlifting world. So for somebody to come into a seminar like that and give pushback, especially when you're talking to a lifter, like, the amount of weight you lift shouldn't directly determine your level of intelligence. But a lot of times it's worth your while. If you're getting advice from a lifter who lifts more than you, it's a good idea to listen to what they say. Yeah. And I like to think we're a couple of pretty strong guys. So we had a lot of strong guys and girls at this seminar in particular, but usually we're still, like, kind of at the top. So I'm not the strongest lifter in the world. You're not the strongest lifter in the world, but we're pretty good lifters. So to be able to give that advice to people who are trying to reach a level of performance that we've reached, but I keep circling back and saying it's super refreshing to deal with a bunch of lifters who are very open-minded, and I think for that reason they're all going to be really successful.
Absolutely. And I mean, I was told long ago, and if you haven't realized this yourself by now, like, there's always going to be someone who's bigger and stronger than you. They're always out there.
Yep.
And so, you got to compete against yourself, and you got to be humble. Like, I think it was someone reminded me of our friend Brian reminded me of it this weekend, that Barbell Brigade, a popular gym in Los Angeles, has a great kind of tagline for their gym: dominate humbly.
Yep.
Which I think is really cool. And you just lifting, all the best lifters I've ever met, aside from I think maybe one I can think of, we're not arrogant pieces of shit. You have to. It doesn't ever hurt you to open up and to get advice and to just try it out and see if it's useful. It's not going to hurt you, But what will hurt you is just deciding that you're already better than everybody else, not taking advice, and seeing if it works for you.
But what I think is great about the sport of powerlifting becoming more popular is that I used to hear the common story of somebody being the lone wolf in their gym who powerlifted. So they automatically consider themselves like, I'm training smarter than everyone around me. I have a more worthy goal than everyone around me. But now that powerlifting is more, socially acceptable or more widely spread, chances are you're not going to be the only person with a powerlifting mindset in your gym, no matter where you go. So it automatically takes away that notion of being a lone wolf, being an island, if you will, going back to the Strength House core values, and just makes people a little bit more open-minded to advice.
Yes. And if you really want to, we were talking about this earlier, if you really want to immerse yourself in the powerlifting world, if you're surrounded by good people in the powerlifting world, I haven't seen a community that's more supportive. Like, as far as the good coaches, the great coaches, the really honest, great coaches that I've met. For example, no one's turned us down to be on this podcast who's a powerlifting coach. Our friend who was on the podcast, John Gaglio, and spent the weekend, at my house. Even helped us coach at the seminar, which we didn't ask him to do. He just showed up and did. If you surround yourself like that and you immerse yourself in, like, what powerlifting really is, it's actually all about trying new things and getting involved in coaching and seeing what's best. It's an awesome community.
And I just want to make it known, because he just tuned into the podcast on Facebook, that Frank Duffy did help us coach. You hung him out to dry when you were thanking everyone at the end of the seminar, and I feel like you really took it the wrong way. So, Frank, thank you for being there. Thank you for gracing us with your presence. You hit a big deadlift. You're the man. We love you. Thank you, Frank.
All right, so to go with that, as a new lifter, since the topic tonight is kind of troubleshooting for the beginner powerlifter, as a new lifter, do whatever you can to take advice wherever you can get it from people that have already walked the walk for longer than you have, and don't be somebody that's, you could be gifted, you could be very physically gifted, but do not be arrogant. Try to take everyone's advice and accept what's useful and use it, and reject what's not and don't, just like Bruce Lee has taught us for a long time.
Bruce Lee. All right. Well, we came across an interesting topic, one that maybe we spent more time on than any other off topic during the seminar. It was early on, kind of talking about mentality and mindset. You mentioned that powerlifting is almost like the X Games of fitness. It's pretty extreme.
Yeah.
And you noted that you kind of have to have like a couple screws loose in your head to do well in this sport because it's uncomfortable. You have to sacrifice a lot to train that hard. And some of the attendees were like, oh, I have a couple screws loose. What do you mean? I think after you explained it, people kind of started to get it. But one thing we talked about is that like even if you're a coach and you have clients who want to get strong, you don't necessarily have to powerlift. So can you talk about a little bit about that notion? Like you wrote a really good blog post a while back that got a lot of traction called "You Don't Have to Do This." What did you mean when you said you don't have to do this?
Yeah, this is something I firmly believe in. You know, we all talk about in the powerlifting world, like, I don't know, you want to, if there's something that I would hope for the powerlifting world, so we can avoid something that happened, I would say, in the CrossFit world. And that is, CrossFit became something that people turned to get into shape. And CrossFit gyms opened up all over the world just accepting people who wanted to get into shape, when in reality, both CrossFit and powerlifting and Olympic weightlifting and strongman are all, or in strong woman, are all, they're all sports. They're all strength sports. They're not exercise they're not exercise. You can take that however you want. Like, oh, I'm exercising though when I lift weights. You are, but if you're competing for powerlifting, or you're competing for the CrossFit Games, or you're training for a strongman competition, or you're competing for an Olympic weightlifting meet, you're in a sporting event, and you're no different than someone going to baseball practice, or football practice, or soccer practice, or something like that. And that means that you have to accept a certain amount of risk that is involved with that. You know, as a strength and conditioning coach as well, we both know that one thing we don't want to do is ever hurt any athletes in the gym, because that would be breaking the cardinal sin of strength and conditioning. You do not want to hurt athletes in the gym. If they're going to get hurt, they should get hurt on the field, because that might just happen. It's part of the game. When it comes to powerlifting, you very well might get hurt training. I hope not. Or you very well may get hurt in a meet. I hope not, but it could happen because you're pushing a form of fitness, in this case maximal strength training, to its most extreme level. And that's not something that you should sign up for if your sole goal is just to look better or to feel better or just to get into shape. Now, for sure, there can be things that are learned from powerlifting that you apply to those goals. But that's a lot different than saying, I want to do a powerlifting meet, and I want to pursue this for a while, and this gets me fired up, and this is what I want to do. Which, by all means, I suggest to anyone. Just like you might suggest they join a rec basketball league or a beer league hockey league or something like that. But guys and girls get injured in those things all the time. It's just part of the game. So, you don't have to do this, is kind of the mentality of just saying, just because something is becoming popular, just because powerlifting and those 3 lifts taken seriously is becoming popular again, that shouldn't be the only reason that you're doing it. Or you shouldn't be doing it because you want to look like a powerlifter or look like some of the elite lifters that you idolize, or you want to impress your friends. Or, it should be because you really love the sport, you really love the training that goes along with it, you love the culture, and you're trying to immerse yourself in it, and you accept both the pros and the cons of that situation. And to be honest, if you're going to succeed at it, at the highest level and even down to trying to set, like, let's say, an elite total, that is going to take couple screws loose in your head. It's going to take a little bit of a flair for the extreme.
Yep, and you always say that, like, you use the example during our seminars that a lot of times you'll see videos on the internet of somebody using complete dog shit form on a lift. Usually it's the deadlift. And, like, it looks terrible, but they get through the lift and they don't get hurt. And why is that? Oftentimes it's the confidence with which they approach the bar. Because, like, getting hurt is never like a thought in their mind. and people like that just often happen to just get the right amount of tension or just stay out of that kind of range of motion where they might get hurt. And it's often the people who have it in the back of their mind, like, I don't know about this. This seems kind of heavy. I'm afraid I'm going to get hurt. Those are often the people who get hurt. So it's often just a mindset thing that will often protect you. Of course, you got to practice good form. You got to bring your technical max as close to your absolute max as possible. But having that kind of killer instinct and that savage mindset is something that will take you a long, long ways in powerlifting.
Absolutely. And I think, another thing that's happening in that same vein, I won't go on this too long, we got a lot of topics to talk about, is when you talk about powerlifting, now that you're talking, or really any strength sport, but probably powerlifting it's just the most accessible one, because you're talking about 3 lifts that get done by a lot of people. So, like, when Olympic weightlifting is popular, but you have, like, snatches, cleans, and jerks.
Way too hard.
And I guess what I'm getting to is, now you have, like, orthopedic people, you have PTs, you have all these people that think they can comment on what you're doing, and they're feeding people's brains. They're basically taking people and softening them up to a degree, or making them a little bit too overly analytical, and they're going back and doing these lifts, and it's just like a constant cycle of them getting hurt because they're hearing, oh, when you squat you have to do this, and when you bench press like this and deadlift like this, because they kind of know what those lifts are, so they feel like they can speak to them. Whereas those same medical professions probably don't speak to, like, throwing a baseball necessarily. They probably don't speak to, taking a 40-yard run through the middle, or, many other things that happen in sports, because they can't speak to them. But they feel like, because they're kind of medical professionals in, like, an exercise sense, they can speak to them. And I thought that it was absolutely fucking awesome that we had a handful of physical therapists at our seminar who got in there and trained, and now they can speak way better too. Like, I was thinking to myself, this would be cool if we didn't optimize the big 3 just for physical therapists, and just talked about what powerlifting is and what they can expect to see, because people will get hurt. It's part of the game, and I mean, that's something we might develop in the future, I think.
Yep, and I talked to a handful of the physical therapists at our seminar who said almost the exact same line: we're seeing more powerlifters than ever. And I think high-level powerlifters are recognizing that they need to, like, create this network and have people in their corner who can help them when they get banged up. But that, of course, requires the PTs and the chiros and the LMTs and all that support system to understand the sport.
Yes.
So if you're a PT who's going to work with football players, hopefully you understand the sport. You watch the sport. You get involved with it somehow. Same with powerlifting.
Right, because when you kind of offload someone and say, okay, you're feeling better, you need to know how much you can't fill their head with all these things that they need to work on and think about, because if they take that back to the powerlifting realm, they're going to keep hurting themselves because they're way too internally focused instead of extra. So, sorry for that burp. But yeah, I think it would be cool if we did a seminar just for that crowd. Absolutely.
Yeah. Our friend Michelle says orthodox too, so they stop telling people they shouldn't squat or lift. Yeah, what a irresponsible thing for a medical professional to say. Like, you shouldn't do XYZ exercise because it's bad for XYZ.
Yeah.
But I think we're getting beyond that point a lot of times. I think that a lot of the old kind of, like, wives' tales, if you will, are kind of going away as a lot of this stuff becomes more mainstream.
Absolutely. All right, so topic number 3 that came up a lot is, at the Strength House, we classify exercises basically into 3 categories. We have our competition lifts, we have our supplementary lifts, and we have assistance lifts. 4 categories, and we have our general physical preparation means. And we can basically put all kinds of exercises into one of those 4 categories. And we'll talk about what those mean in a second. But, well, why don't we start with that? Why don't we...
Yeah. I know, the screen is in a specific order, the script, but we are not shy about going off script.
Yeah.
Or at least reorganizing the script.
So we categorize everything into 4 lifts. So, like I said, 4 categories: competition lifts, supplementary lifts, assistance exercises, and general physical preparation means. And so just to throw the competition lifts out, that means any lift that you're doing, squat, bench press, or deadlift, sumo or conventional, with any supportive gear that you're using. So if you're using a belt, that has to be on to count as a competition lift. If you're using knee wraps or knee sleeve, those have to be on to be a competition lift. Supplementary lifts are one thing that we talked a lot about in the seminar. What is one thing you try to get from a supplementary lift?
Well, I think that you need to have direct carryover to your competition lift. That's number one. Like, you're using this lift to make sure you can lift more weight in the competition lift or improve a weak point in that competition lift. So it's often very, very close in nature, usually the same exercise almost exactly, with some sort of small tweak, whether it's a difference in, like, let's say, grip width in a bench press, maybe stance width or bar placement in a squat. For a deadlift, maybe it's a change in where the bar starts, whether you're doing a block pull and it's a little bit elevated. Deficit deadlift, the range of motion is increased. It's very, very close to the main lift, so it has the most carryover.
Yep. And the other thing we talk about with the supplementary lifts is, they can carry over in one of two ways. So they can carry over from purely a strength standpoint. So I think that, one example that is tried and true that we've seen is that we call, a close grip bench press is a supplementary lift for the competition bench press. And without fail, a lot of times, if you can raise your close grip bench press in strength, you will see a raise in strength to your competition bench press.
Yep.
The other caveat to that is that a supplementary lift can also help just like your technical awareness as well. So that's where we start thinking about things like possibly like a spoto press or a concentric pause bench press. Those help groove a better bar path for you. And they don't necessarily have a rise in strength because the weights that you're handling there are usually pretty submaximal to your bench press anyway. So physiologically, you're not probably going to get stronger from doing those. But what you are going to do is get a much more efficient bench press stroke, and then that's going to actually carry over, and you're going to see improvements into your normal bench press. So, a supplementary lift either has to aid your strength or aid, I'm burping all over the place, or aid your technical prowess in that lift.
Yeah, and pretty much the first supplementary lift we talk about for each of the competition lift is a pause variation of each of those lifts. Yep. So, like, what's the simplest way to make each of your competition lifts better? Add a pause. Somewhere in the range of motion, could be at the bottom, could be midway. You mix it up a little bit, take a little bit of weight off the bar so that pause doesn't crush you, but just adding pauses to your competition lifts, that's always my first supplementary variation that I go to with lifters.
And I think a common theme, especially with beginner powerlifters, is your supplementary lifts and pretty much everything that you do in the gym, the goal should be to make the exercise harder.
Oh yeah, absolutely.
There's some savvy ways to use block pulls or to use things that kind of let you overload exercises, but for the most part, those have no place in a beginner powerlifters program.
Yep.
If anything, you should be trying to make the exercise more difficult, either by increasing the range of motion or stalling the tempo with a pause. As a beginner strength athlete, I can't encourage you enough. If you could sum it up, if I could sum it up in like kind of one statement, it would be: check your ego at the door. Start using less weight, but making that weight feel harder, using harder variations, and just watch your strength go through the roof.
Yep. And another one sentence suggestion I would add to that is find your weak point in the lift and add a pause right before that weak point. So, if you stall, let's say, midway up on the chest, off the chest during a bench press, add an extra long pause on the chest. If you stall right at lockout on the bench press, add a pause midway up. So you have to be really aggressive through lockout. Just wherever you struggle, make that the hardest part of the lift with your supplementary lift.
And make sure too that you kind of sorry, I might be allergic or something.
I know I developed a hop allergy for a little while, and I think it was Nelson.
Nelson.
I know you love Nelson, but it was always Trillium Stilling Street, which is primarily Nelson hops. And
Nelson had you in the full Nelson.
Dude, it's so good, but it gave me the old itchy throat, you know?
Yeah. So I would say the one thing you also have to keep in mind is if you really want to be great and you really want to make progress faster, it's not just about adding the pause where that sticking point is, but also understanding where your technical breakdown might be, and not only adding the pause, but using the pause to work on that technical breakdown. So if we're going to use the bench as an example, and you're using like a Spoto press. So Spoto press is, instead of actually pausing on the chest, you pause about an inch, a half inch off of your chest. That's a great exercise for someone that maybe starts to kind of cave in when they get to the very bottom of their bench press, or start to kind of, one thing we talk about the bench press is the elbows need to stay under the bar at all times. So that usually breaks down at the very last second for most lifters. Right before they touch their chest, they either kind of start to let the bar drift forward or they get over tucked. You need to understand, what are you doing wrong? Here's the pause so that you can consciously think about it. If you have those two things going and you do a nice 4-week cycle of that, you're going to see a lot of gains.
Absolutely. So a lot of the supplementary lifts work on what we call mechanical stress. It's something that's dealing specifically with like straining under a little bit heavier weight. Even though you may be using submaximal weight, it's meant to improve strength. And we talked a little bit as you progress from supplementary to assistance lifts that you maybe want to focus on a different kind of stress. Can you talk about the difference in stress from a supplementary lift to an accessory or an assistance lift?
Yeah, so accessory and assistance lift, we kind of use both those words a little interchangeably. They both start with A. But basically, once we shift from our competition and our supplementary lifts, where we're mostly using reps between probably 1 and 5, we start to get into our accessory and assistance lifts, which are pretty much 6+. What we're looking for there is more of just like an armor building, which is just like a term I really like, just kind of building armor, which probably comes from more of the football training background, but basically putting on size, putting on some muscle. And when we're looking there is for more of a metabolic stress. We're trying to look for more hypertrophy. And obviously there's some hypertrophy gains that happen from reps within 1 to 5 range as well. So I guess the reason that we're trying to vary those up is that the stress that's caused on your body is quite different from a heavy mechanical loading standpoint and a metabolic loading standpoint. And you can recover a little bit quicker from the metabolic stress that's placed on your body than you can from that mechanical loading, more neurological type stress. So the assistance lifts are really all about, the easiest way to put it is chasing the pump. So that's going to be stuff where you want to do two things. It's a little bit about a higher rep range sometimes, but what I've learned more often is it's actually really more about a stricter rest interval. And I've seen great gains in size and therefore strength, but not necessarily subscribing to the fact that I have to do all my assistance accessory lifts with, in the rep range of like 10, 12, 15. I could do it like 6, 7, 8, maybe even 5, but I don't rest more or have people rest more than say 60 to 90 seconds on these exercises. So there's not really full recovery, and the metabolic stress takes quite a hold there.
Yep, and to get nerdy for a second, there's a lot of good research that shows that one of the main triggers of hypertrophy is some sort of metabolite buildup. So you do a set, let's say a bicep curls, you get that kind of like burning feeling in your arms. You get an increase, you get localized lactate buildup. So what people used to call lactic acid, it's actually called lactate. Who gives a fuck? Anyways, we call it lactate. And you get hydrogen ions that are built up with that, which creates that kind of burning feeling. And there's some sort of buildup of metabolic byproducts, which is associated with building bigger muscles. So pretty much Arnold was right. He said, like, you go until you feel it burning and tight and the blood is in there. It feels
as good as coming.
And that is important, turns out, for building bigger muscles. So, you can build bigger muscles by straining under really heavy weight, but you can also build bigger muscles by getting that burning feeling, by getting that tight, blood-filled feeling in the localized muscle. So there's a good reason to chase the pump, because you're pushing stuff into the muscle that's going to basically tell it, hey, you need to grow bigger. So there's something to that.
Absolutely. Yep. And like I said, if you just chase the mechanical loading throughout from top to bottom in your program,
you would get so beat up.
You're going to get smoked. You're going to get beat up.
And you might not look like you lift.
You might not. I mean, yeah, definitely. You might not. But then there's also just that chance that, and I see that a lot with the person just like, man, I'm just achy all the time. I just feel like shit. You're probably pushing things, a little too heavy throughout your program. Not necessarily through just your competition and supplementary lifts, because those do need to be pushed pretty heavy. But your assistance and accessory work as well.
Yep. And I had a professor in grad school who was a very high-level bodybuilder back in the day. And he, early in his bodybuilding career, said he was a big fan of training really heavy. He'd squat really heavy, bench really heavy, leg press really heavy, and all he ever did was get hurt. And he didn't care how much weight he lifted. All he wanted to do was be as big as possible for the show. He said when he shifted over to more of that mindset of like, I'm not necessarily going to count reps. I'm not going to care how much weight is on the bar or on the machine or whatever. I'm just going to go until it burns like hell and then do a couple more reps. And that, he said, that's when he just started to stay healthier and get a lot bigger. So I think there's something to going like, sure, do your competition lifts nice and heavy, sets of 1 to 5. Do your supplementary lifts in a similar rep range. But once you get to your kind of accessory or assistance lifts, worry a little bit less about what weight you're using. Worry more about taking away joint stress, whether that's a hand position or the implement or a foot position or whatever. Use whatever means you need necessary to put the focus less on the movement and more on the muscle.
Yeah. Yeah. And to just come full circle, I do think there's, if I've learned something from training with Josh Bryant, it would be that you can do that. You can kind of get a little bit of the best of both worlds. Let's say if you're taking things like rows for heavier sets of 6, only resting 45 seconds and going right back into a heavy set of 6. Because it's almost like just taking rest pause sets.
Yep.
So you still have heavier weight in your hands because overall your goal is strength, but you're chasing, it's still more of like that metabolic stress, because long term, if I go grab hundreds for these rows, I'm not going to last, because I got 5 sets of 6 with 45 seconds rest. I got to grab something more like 70s.
Yep. And to go back to the nerdiness of it all, like if you keep those rest periods short, your body can't clear out that lactate. Your body can't clear out those metabolic byproducts. And oftentimes that break is more like mental than anything. Like the brain is always going to shut down before the body does. So if you give yourself those short breaks, it gives your brain just enough of a break to say like, okay, I can do a few more reps. But it keeps that metabolic stress really, really high. So like if you read something by like a guy like Paul Carter, he writes for Teen Asian a lot. He's very active on Instagram. He's always been a big proponent of like the 90-second rest interval. I feel like I've read from him a ton. And that's like that's on the, I guess, the longer end of what we're talking about. But if you keep your rest intervals for like bodybuilding stuff at 90 seconds or less, you're probably going to experience some pretty good gains in muscle size.
Yeah, and I'd say 90 seconds is probably the most common rest interval that I program. Anyways.
Yeah, me too.
And one thing I want to end this topic with is, as Tony said, talking about your professor, if you really want to be good in this sport, and we want to go back to the screws loose in your head type of thing, it is true, because you have to have that screw loose to say, oh, that was heavy, I'd go a little heavier. You know what I mean? And
we had a bit of a commercial gym adventure today with your
right,
squats,
right?
Where twice I thought you were done, and you're like, oh, I'm gonna go a little heavier. I'm like,
I like to go a little heavier. And the same thing with your pump work. Like, oh, you think that burns? Keep going until it fucking hurts, because it burns so much, and then you'll be good. You know what I mean? If that seems heavy for a set of 3, it's in you. It's just not going to be easy. If that set of 12, you want to end it at 10 because it burns so bad, take it to 12. Add a bonus rep for 13.
Yeah, you watch like Pumping Iron, you watch Arnold and like Lou Ferrigno push each other, and it looks so cheesy and whatever, but like that makes all the difference. When you're ready to quit, having somebody right next to you be like, "Hey, a couple more, let's go."
Yep.
You know, and sometimes that's all it takes.
Don't ring the bell.
Don't ring the bell. Speaking of one more,
Let's do one more.
I gotta say, Jordan, this ivory tower was a delight.
It was excellent. Yep. It grew on me, if anything.
Well played.
So, Jordan was nice enough to send us a 4-pack of each of these. Did you have any of them? The ones I gave you?
Not yet. I'm
No.
saving them.
I had a sip of this that I gave to my wife.
Sip of this.
Because she wanted a beer, and I said, well, try one of these. I'm interested to try it again because it has Galaxy.
It's got all the favorites.
It's got all our favorite hops. In my one sip of it earlier, I thought it was like just a little too milky.
Milky.
Like too thick, but...
Alright, well, what we're talking about, we're having Interstellar Burst. Again, from Triple Crossing Brewery in Richmond, Virginia. And this is a double IPA brewed with Galaxy, Citra, and El Dorado hops. So Galaxy is my personal favorite, yeah.
Yeah, mine too at this point.
Citra is another very, like, kind of like on the bitterness end, what you see with more like the dank IPAs. And El Dorado, I couldn't tell you many characteristics of El Dorado, but it sounds good. I know it's a song, right?
El Dorado.
El Dorado. Maybe I'm just making that up.
All right. Classic JoJo Beans just clicked in here.
Classic JoJo Beans.
Classic JoJo Beans. So we got Interstellar Burst. Let's see what it's about.
It's hazy. It smells like a hazy IPA. You smell the Galaxy.
Yeah,
That's a Galaxy.
All right, let's see.
Let's go. I have a feeling. I'm just going to put it out there that I'm going to love this. I get the milkiness.
You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Because I think it overshadows some of the hops.
Yep.
Hops.
This has a texture like a Tired Hands milkshake almost, which we may get to experience this week, perhaps, maybe.
Yeah. Going down to Philly this weekend.
Yep. Headed out to Warhorse Barbell.
See our good friends at Warhorse Barbell.
Northern Liberties.
Yep, do a little bit of a gym observing and beer drinking. Someone asked earlier, when's the gym going to be open? We're shooting for early October, guys. As early in October as possible.
Maybe we should have a big Halloween party.
I thought about that.
I set the bar really high with my Stone Cold Steve Austin outfit from last year. If you have Instagram,
you know what the beauty of having our own gym is? We can do anything we fucking want.
Anything we want.
It's going to be a great time. It's going to be a great time. Yeah, we might have one. Jemima just joined. Jemima, how are you? I haven't seen you in a long time. Long-time CSP client.
Yep, of CSP Strength Camp fame.
CSP Strength Camp clients.
Maddie D joined too, one of my most treasured training partners at Adelphi. Down in the cage, we called it, basically a storage closet under the bleachers in the basketball gym. Great times are had down there. Hit my first 500 squat and my first 350 bench in that gym.
Those are some good numbers.
Matty D was spotting me for both of those.
That's awesome.
So cheers to Matty D. Another New Yorker. Too many New Yorkers in my life between Matty and Frank Duffy.
Frank Duffy. What are we going to do with him?
I don't know.
Anyways, back to beginner powerlifting troubleshooting. We've covered a lot so far. So question 6 is, well, this is technically one I want to talk about.
Yeah.
So one thing I see with a lot, and I'm guilty of this too, just in writing programs, is that, and you mentioned Paul Carter before, and actually Paul Carter is one of the guys, and I love reading a lot of his ebooks and things like that. And he's got a great ebook out there called Base Building. If you haven't checked it out, it's a really solid ebook. And he talks a lot about about kind of just applying the same stressor for a elongated period of time. And that can work really well. And actually, you know, as I've transitioned from just completing a recent powerlifting meet, and we got a lot of things going on, and I was thinking about my training and, you know, what am I going to do with my training? Because I have to be a little more fluid with it. Today aside, as we worked a little heavier, But
well, can I pause you for 1 second? So here's a ticket for powerlifting success. If left to your own devices, you will max out every single time. I think you'll be a good powerlifter. That's a good sign.
Yeah.
I think if you don't have a coach and every time you go in the gym, you fucking max out, that's a dumbass thing to do, but it's also a good sign that you have a screw loose. So if you're one of those people, get a coach. They'll dial you in. They'll make it so you don't kill yourself. But
max out on all your lifts, not just the bench press.
but the two times that we've trained together since your meet, you basically worked up to a really heavy ass single.
Mm-hmm. I like doing that. It's because I also hate rep work. But speaking of rep work, it can be really important. And one thing that you can do is, a lot of people think you have to apply some kind of progressive overload every single time you train. But a certain amount of stress, if it's kind of strong enough, is something that you can keep applying to an organism yourself long enough, and it will take a while for your body to fully adapt, or I guess to fully stop having a reason to adapt. A good example is 5x5 at 75%, which is a favorite of mine.
That's what you're supposed to do today.
Yeah,
right?
That's what I was supposed to do today, and I'll do it next week, but I did it on the bench this week, so 5x5 at 75%. It's not impossible. It's not easy, especially if you keep your rest intervals short enough. So we talk about density also as a variable that you can keep track of. Density being, how much work did you do in a certain amount of time, and if you can improve on that, that's also a form of progressive overload. So if you're in a training rut, or you're trying, managing volume can be tough if you're just getting into it. Here's a really easy way to convey that to you. Take 5x5 at 75%. Do it every session until it's not hard. At that point, you're starting to adapt to it, and you can move on. And you can start to do, let's say, something like 8x3 at 80% until it's not hard. I mean, a lot of programs are based off of peaking, because a lot of programs want to give you a PR, which is great. I mean, that's kind of what sells. That's why you want to do a program. A lot of times, even when I onboard a client for their first 12 weeks, I try to put them under a 12-week program to set some PRs, just because I know that we can get there because the programming is more intelligent. And it's not as sexy, or they might not feel like I'm doing my job if every week I say we're doing 5x5 at 315 on the bench until it's not hard. You have no idea how valuable that is, though. That can work really, really, really well.
Yep, I think there are a couple reasons why that might work. So it may work because you're building up some sort of fatigue through that program. So week 1, 5x5 at 75% is, what it is. I hate that term. It is what it is. Biggest cop-out term of all time. My wife has a coffee cup that says on there, I want to fucking smash it. But if you build up some fatigue during that week, let's say you do a second session of the same exercise, the next time you come around to that the next week, it's probably going to be harder because it's still the same sets, reps, percentage, but you're under more fatigue. So it technically is some sort of overload. Or maybe just by doing that over and over, you become more technically sound, so that way it becomes less challenging. Yeah. So it is, even though on paper it doesn't look like you're overloading, it looks like you're doing the same thing over and over, you do technically get better by doing that same thing for several weeks in a row.
Yeah. I mean, it sounds like, you'd feel bad because you'd go to a coach, or you'd go to your barbell class, and you'd say, we did 5x5 at 75% for 3 weeks in a row, and then we deloaded, and then we did 8x3 at 80% for 3 weeks, and then we deloaded, and it's like we didn't do anything. But I can't stress enough that if someone forced you to do that, they're probably helping you out way more than you know.
Yep, and what your 5x5 at 75%, my favorite is 5 sets of 3 at 80%. And I'll always go back to the period where I made the most bench press progress in my entire life was using like a Chico-based program where every Monday I bench pressed 5 sets of 3 at 80%. And eventually, over the course of several weeks, it did become easy. You know, and then I started adding on my own after like completing that program, instead of just doing 5 sets of 3. Like week 1 I did 5 sets of 3 at 80%, and week 2 I did 6 sets of 3, and then 7 sets of 3, and then arriving to your 8 sets of 3, that what you just said. And once you can do 24 total reps at 80% of your 1RM, like with nice crisp reps, everything being very technically sound, you're gonna be pretty fucking strong.
You're gonna be really strong.
Really strong.
And yeah, it's common sense if you think about it, right? Like, everyone wants to chase a new 1 rep max or a new PR, but in reality, if you can choose something, a set and rep prescription at a certain percentage that's doable but quite challenging today, and you just keep doing it until it is not challenging, are you telling me that you are not stronger than you were before? You're definitely fucking stronger than you were before.
And sometimes we push progressive overload so hard that you're tempted to change everything every week. And like you said, as a coach, sometimes presenting the same thing 2 or 3 weeks in a row to a client feels like you're being lazy.
Yeah.
When in reality, you're actually just doing your job.
Right.
Hashtag do your job. Hashtag 19-0, almost Patriots football season.
This year. It's true. And honestly, I trend towards that more with people that don't have like a meet or something like that, because that doesn't necessarily work perfectly for a meet. If you're a beginner powerlifter for training for a meet, that doesn't necessarily work perfectly, because neurologically you do need to kind of peak and handle some heavier stuff for sure. But a lot of times I am going back and looking at programs and saying like, well, okay, you handled this weight, and I'm adding like maybe 1 rep to that. Just trying to do a little bit more than you did before.
And that's sustainable over the long term, right?
Yeah.
Like I kept saying over and over, I sounded like a broken record at the seminar, like powerlifting is a long-term sport. It's not something where like you get in and you get out, you make gains really fast. Like no, like you try to map yourself over the course of a very long training career. We're talking 20, 30 years. That's a long ass time. 30 years is longer than I've been alive by a little bit. You know, to think of, you know, being a powerlifter that long seems almost insane, but a lot of the best powerlifters in the world that you see are like in their 40s, you know, and a lot of them took it up in their teens, so they've been training a long time. Whether or not they trained with an intelligent approach that whole time, we don't know, but there's a good chance that they've taken that long-term approach to be able to make sustained gains over that entire time.
Yes, absolutely. All right, so the other thing we talked about a lot at the seminar was, and it's starting to get a little bit more mainstream in powerlifting, but the idea that an ounce of the prevention is worth a pound of the cure. And, you know, that's just talking about, you know, you get a powerlifting program, a lot of the mainstream powerlifting programs, you get a lot of your normal sagittal plane exercises, the stuff that you could pull out of, you know, Schwarzenegger's Bodybuilding Bible, or any other kind of common powerlifting type publication. And you're going to do a lot of pressing, a lot of rowing, a lot of squatting, a lot of pulling. And it doesn't take a lot to stay healthy. It just takes just being slightly more intelligent. You know what I mean? And just saying, okay, if I do everything front to back, and we know that injury, the equation for injury is basically solely based on repetitive motion and how much intensity you're doing it with, and how many repetitions you're doing it with. And well, powerlifting, it might be the perfect example. A lot of the same repetitions with a lot of intensity and a lot of the same movements. All you got to do is just throw a little bit of a curveball in there.
A little bit of a curveball.
Throw the wrinkle.
And I don't think I ever swung at a breaking pitch in my entire college baseball career, so maybe that was a bad example. But yeah, like a lot of like old school maybe powerlifting / barbell focused programs, like their cure, if you will, is like, let's do some rows and let's do some pull-ups so you don't fuck up your shoulders, right? Balance out the front to back. We know it's not that simple, But in reality, it is pretty simple. And the rules of that, I think, are like get on one leg at a time, use one arm at a time, and get out of the sagittal plane.
Get out of the sagittal plane.
Yeah, that's the big one. Get in the frontal plane a little bit, so like side to side. Get in the transverse plane a little bit, so rotate or resist rotation. And those two things alone will do absolute wonders to keep you in the powerlifting game for a long time.
Absolutely. And I think that's the name of the game. And you'll see a lot of people, because they're like, well, we can insert ourselves into this powerlifting world and give you some like real voodoo shit and say, this will work, this will work. What really works is just vary up your movement. Just move side to side. Do some lateral lunges. Do some medicine ball throws. Run some hills once in a while. Like,
don't be the guy who feels like Jabba the Hutt walking up a flight of stairs.
If we want to go back to where we started, talking about the fact that powerlifting is a sport, treat yourself like an athlete. Like, treat yourself like an athlete who competes in powerlifting. And what would an athlete do? Like, they would do some athletic movements. And your sport is lifting weights. It's not running. But that doesn't mean that you don't include a little bit of running. Just like someone that's a sprinter sprints more, but they include a little bit of high intensity lifting, because that is, part of the preparation for their sport. So it's really common sense in a lot of ways, and it's just like, be a little bit more global in your thought process about what you're doing.
Yeah, I definitely feel very blessed to come from like the background that we did, and working with a lot of baseball players and working with a lot of team sport athletes, because you just learn a lot about human movement from a lot of different perspectives. And whereas powerlifting is hyper specific, there are only 3 exercises that really matter, but there are a million different exercises that could help.
Yeah.
And like it's a very small percentage when you categorize it into competition lift, supplementary lift, assistance lift, and then you have your GPP, a phrase that I feel like gets misconstrued all the time. Like, that's just shit that's going to help you not get hurt,
Right.
and make you a very well-rounded lifter. And I know since, you've helped me with my programming over the past couple of years, as I've started to incorporate more non-sagittal plane movements into my lifting, incorporate more aerobic conditioning, very low intensity conditioning for a little bit longer duration, it's helped me stay healthy and feel good.
Yeah.
And just hammering the same thing over and over and over, you get to that repetitive injury situation, as I slam the desk and knock my phone off of the stand. But the saying I always go back to is like, if it's easy to do, it's also easy not to do. So it's very easy to skip that stuff. But if you just take the extra 10 minutes at the end of your training session to approach some of those things, I think it'll have a huge impact in the long term.
Absolutely. Yep. All right, so maybe one of our close to final topics tonight is, one question we got at the seminar, which I think, we covered. It's a short answer. We covered it well at the seminar, but it was a good question. Came from our man Devin, coming out of Toronto, coming all the way down to the seminar. Was significant. If you're somebody, we preached about, if you're more of a beginner to powerlifting, you can compete more often in a training year. And if you're more advanced in powerlifting, you should compete less in a training year. So since we're talking about beginner powerlifters, the caveat to that might be, what if you're a beginner powerlifter in the sense that you've never competed, but that you've trained the squat, the bench press, and the deadlift for a significant period of time, and you have pretty good strength in those lifts? What would you recommend for how many meets to do in a year?
And I think that's where your training age comes into play. Like, you've been training hard for a long period of time, even though you've never competed, you're still kind of like an advanced lifter, if you will. So that person should probably still compete less, probably not more than twice a year, but you might use one of those 2 meets as kind of like a tune-up meet, or like a meet to set some PRs with maybe less supportive gear. Maybe let's do a meet without knee wraps. Let's do a meet in just knee sleeves instead of knee wraps in the squat. Something like that. And that's something that, like we talked about John Gaglione earlier, John handles a lot of high level lifters, and he's given me a lot of great advice on that in the past year or so since we've been talking about that kind of thing. So even though you've never competed in powerlifting, you're not a true beginner and your strength levels are still kind of up there, don't treat yourself as an elite lifter who maybe only competes once a year at national meets, but use one of those 2 to 3 lifts per year, or competitions per year rather, as a competition where you're not going to hit true PRs, but you're going to kind of tune up for the real meets that mean a lot to you.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, you can use those meets to, especially as a lifter who's brand new, never done a meet. You have the chance to maybe come in and make an impact right away and place well in your first meet if that's important to you. But doing your first meet can be it can be a lot to handle. I mean, as an example, I hadn't competed in almost 4 years since a couple weekends ago. And, hold on 1 second.
Reset the IG.
So, I hadn't competed in like 4 years, and it's incredible how fast you can kind of lose some of the the prowess that you have. Even as someone that has coached people in these meets, I went into my first bench and just completely jumped the bench command just forgot it existed altogether. Like, there's a lot of kind of like small nuanced rules and things that go on that if it's your first time, you might just want to experience that a little bit when you're when you're just going to hit some numbers that aren't too challenging for you.
Yep.
And see how you rise to competition. How do you feel on that day?
Yep. And I've been listening to maybe too much Boston Sports Talk Radio recently, but after last night's pretty much pathetic use of the Red Sox bullpen, I had to... Ooh, we got some sediment. Anyways, I'll finish my thought. There's a difference in baseball between throwing a bullpen and going out in the 8th inning and throwing to 3 batters,
Yeah.
Like, you could certainly throw the bullpen and simulate a live game experience, but you're never going to truly replicate that experience of, like, running out of the bullpen in the 8th inning and throwing in front of 30,000 people. They're just different.
Right.
While they may serve the same purpose, they're not exactly the same. So for a lifter who knows they're going to compete in like a national meet, maybe you do the qualifier just to do it under a little bit more like strenuous circumstances. So once you get to the national meet, you're more ready for that circumstance.
Absolutely.
I don't think I have any sediment in
I got
mind.
some serious sediment in mind, so we're going to have to talk to
Yes,
these people.
switch that around a little bit, bro.
Triple cross of Brewing about perfecting their craft a little bit.
What's our can date? I can't see. It's all off kilter.
I can't tell.
I can't
Anyways, guys, that covers all of our topics for tonight. We are a little bit over an hour, and we like to keep it right at about an hour for you fine folks at home. Thank you for tuning in. We will be back next week.
That's the plan.
That is the plan,
We
guys.
like to fly by the seat of our pants sometimes.
We do. We do like to fly by the seat of our pants, but we'll be back next week, and next week we got a podcast for you, and every week after that, we will be coming to you live from the inside of the actual Strength House. We'll probably broadcast from right inside the gym, so you'll be able to kind of keep track of how we're building out and everything that we're doing. But thank you guys for all the support as well. It was a great seminar this past weekend. Like I said, one of the biggest that we've had.
Yep. And that's
really
always
cool.
that's always an event that I really look forward to. It makes me feel really accomplished as a coach to be able to work with so many lifters. People give up their Sundays, and Sundays are sacred, man, especially once football season comes around. Come out and hang with us. So we appreciate everyone who came out, everyone who gave us all this good material to go over today. And a big thank you to Jordan for sending us 2 really kick-ass beers.
Thank you, Jordan, and your buddy out there. I want to say it was David Neal.
David Neal. That sounds about right. David, if you're out there, give us a shout. We thank you very much
We appreciate it.
for sending us some brews for today's podcast.
Thank you to Barbells and in brewskis, barbells in, not, there's no A, there's no D, it's just barbells in brewskis.com for this cool ass shirt I'm wearing, for this fly ass glass I'm drinking out of, and your ass drinking out of. We got some coasters, we got some stickers, they got some cool ass shit. So we will be back at you next week. Peace.